The wind comes first. It does not knock. It throws itself sideways across 200 miles of Vermont farmland, in the worst blizzard the county will see this century, burying fences, burying roads, burying the small wooden mailbox at the end of a long drive nobody has plowed. At the end of that drive stands a farmhouse. One window glows faint. Inside, a little girl in a gray cardigan rocks alone in her grandmother's chair, a silver cross between her fingers, and counts the cans in the pantry one more time. 19 hours. That is how long she has been alone. Outside, three shapes come up the porch steps in leather and snow. One of them is already dying. And somewhere on a clean, dry road 40 miles south in a wool coat that has never seen real winter, a man is opening a green ledger and forging a dead woman's name. The knock at the door is coming. Penny Boone was 8 years old the night the storm came for her, and she had already learned three things most children should never have to know. She knew what a casket looked like when it was small enough for a grandmother who had grown thin from cancer. She knew what an empty house sounded like at 3 in the morning when the refrigerator hummed and the heater clicked and nothing else made a single human sound. And she knew because her grandmother had told her gently the week before she died that grown men sometimes came to take children away when there was no one left to claim them. Outside the kitchen window, the snow was no longer falling. It was being thrown. It hit the glass sideways in sheets, and the wind had a voice like an animal trying to get inside. Penny stood on a wooden chair beside the sink, her socked feet curled against the cold, and she counted the cans in the pantry one more time. 2 of green beans, 1 of cream of mushroom soup dented along the side where her grandmother had dropped it last fall, half a sleeve of crackers, a jar of peanut butter with a butter knife handle sticking out of the top. The bread on the counter had gone hard. The milk in the fridge had turned 3 days ago, and she had poured it down the sink with the same careful hands her grandmother had used to pour out the last of Granddad's whiskey after he passed. She was wearing 2 pairs of socks, leggings under her jeans, and her grandmother's gray cardigan, the one with the small darn near the cuff. Around her neck, she wore the silver cross on a thin chain that Grandma Helen had pressed into her palm in the hospital, her hands so light it barely weighed anything by then. The cross was warm against her skin, everything else was cold. The power had gone out at 4 in the afternoon. The phone in the cradle on the counter had stopped working an hour after that. Her grandmother's old tablet, the one Penny used to watch cartoons on, had run its battery down by supper time, and now it sat dark and useless on the kitchen table beside an envelope with red letters on it that Penny was too young to read all the way through but old enough to understand. The wood stove in the corner was the only thing keeping the house from freezing solid around her, and even that was wrong tonight. The fire kept dipping low, the flame leaning sideways like it was tired, like it was getting hungry for something more than the small split logs she could carry by herself. The big logs were stacked outside in the wood crib, but Grandma Helen had told her never to use the hatchet, and Penny was the kind of girl who kept rules even when the person who made them was no longer there to see. She had been alone for 19 hours. She had counted. Mrs. Bell from down the road had called yesterday afternoon just before the phone went out to say her truck had slid into the ditch trying to get up the county road, and she could not make it. The lady from the county, the one with the soft voice and the clipboard, had said someone would come for Penny as soon as the storm broke. That had been before the storm had become this storm. Now there was no road. There was a long white throat of snow where the road used to be, and Penny could not even see the mailbox at the end of it. She climbed down off the chair and went into the living room and sat in her grandmother's rocking chair, because it was the only chair in the house that still smelled like a person. She did not cry. She had cried a lot at the funeral, and then she had cried again when the social worker had walked through the house, writing things down on a clipboard, and then she had cried again every night for almost 2 weeks. There was a quiet inside her now that was deeper than crying. She held the silver cross between her thumb and her finger and rocked, and outside the wind hit the side of the farmhouse so hard the front door rattled in its frame, and she thought about all the things her grandmother had said to her over the years that she was going to have to remember now without any help. A coat can scare you, sweetheart, but a heart is harder to see. You do not have to be loud to be brave. You just have to stay when staying is hard. Never open the door to a stranger child. Not unless the storm outside is colder than the fear inside you. She had said that last one 100 times. She had said it when the meter reader came around and Penny was watching cartoons. She had said it when the Jehovah's Witnesses came in their good Sunday coats. She had said it the time the man with the broken down car had stopped at the end of the drive and waved. And then she had said it one more time quieter, the week before the ambulance came for the last time, and she had pressed the silver cross into Penny's palm and closed her fingers around it. Never open the door, sweetheart. Not unless the storm outside is colder than the fear inside you. Penny had not understood it then. She thought she understood it a little better now. The wind threw itself at the house again, and somewhere upstairs, a shutter banged once and went still. Penny rocked and held the cross and tried not to think about how the fire was getting smaller and how she could see her breath in the kitchen doorway and how morning was still a very long way off. That was when the first knock came. It was not loud. It was 3 soft thuds against the wood of the front door, the kind of knock a person makes when they have to use their gloved knuckles because their bare ones would stick to the metal. Penny went absolutely still in the rocking chair. She waited. The wind kept screaming. The clock on the wall above the kitchen sink ticked. The fire in the stove popped once, low and small. Then the knock came again. 3 thuds, a little harder this time. Penny slipping down off the chair, and her socked feet did not make a sound on the wooden floor as she crossed to the front window. The window was so frosted she could not see through it. She climbed up onto the wooden stool her grandmother kept by the window for watering the spider plants, and she pulled her sleeve down over her hand and rubbed a small circle in the glass. What she saw stopped her breath in her chest. There were 3 of them on the porch, 3 men. They were huge. They were so coated in snow that they looked almost white like statues, except that they were moving. Behind them, leaning crooked against each other in the drifts at the bottom of the porch steps, were 3 motorcycles. Big ones. Black ones. The kind with chrome that had gone dull with ice. The man closest to the door was the biggest. He had a beard with ice frozen into it and a leather jacket so dark it looked black, and on the chest of that jacket, Penny could see a patch. She did not know how to read the words on it yet, but she had seen that kind of patch one time on the television when her grandmother had been watching the news, and her grandmother had reached forward and changed the channel and said quietly, "Those are the kind of men we do not invite for supper, sweetheart." Hell's Angels, she remembered the name. Behind the big man with the beard, the second rider was standing with his shoulders hunched and his back against the porch rail, and the third one, an older man with gray in his beard, was sitting on the porch boards. Just sitting. His head was down. His gloved hands were tucked up under his arms, and Penny could see, even through the frost on the glass, that he was shaking. Not shivering. Shaking. The kind of shaking that came from deep down, the kind her grandmother had done at the end. Penny climbed down off the stool and put both hands over her mouth. The voice came through the door, then rough and low, and it was the kind of voice that belonged to the kind of man her grandmother had told her never to open a door for. "Ma'am," the man said. A pause, the wind tore at the porch. "We don't want trouble. One of our men is freezing. We just need shelter till morning, please." Penny did not move. The word please was the part that did it. Grown men did not say please to little girls. Not in the voice this man had used. There had been something underneath the rough of it, something tired, something close to broken. Penny climbed back up on the stool and looked through the small circle she had wiped clear. The man with the beard had moved aside just half a step so she could see the older one on the boards behind him. The older man was no longer just shaking. His head had tipped forward. His chin was almost on his chest. The middle rider had crouched down beside him, one hand on his shoulder, the other gripping his arm, and Penny could see his mouth moving like he was trying to keep the older one talking. Her grandmother's voice came up inside her, soft as a hand on the back of her neck. "Unless the storm outside is colder than the fear inside you." Penny got down off the stool. She stood in the entryway with her hand on the chain lock for a long time, and her heart was beating so hard she could feel it under the silver cross. She thought of the man on the porch boards. She thought of how her grandmother had looked at the very end, the last day when she had stopped being able to keep warm under 3 blankets. She thought of how her father, the father she could not really remember, the soldier in the photograph on the refrigerator, had been a man who helped people when nobody was clapping. She slid the chain free. She turned the deadbolt. She opened the door 6 inches, and the wind blew her hair across her face, and she looked up through it at the biggest, most frightening man she had ever seen in her short life. And she said in a voice no larger than a bird's, "Is he going to die?" The big man lowered himself slowly, like she was a deer he was afraid of spooking, until his knees creaked against the porch boards, and his eyes were level with hers. His eyes were brown. They had a lot of lines around them. They were the eyes of a man who had seen many things and had not slept well in a long while. "Not if you let us in, ma'am," he said. His voice was quieter now. He was talking to her the way her grandmother had talked to baby birds that fell out of nests. "My name's Axel Cross. Most folks call me Iron. We won't go past where you tell us to. We'll stand right here at the door if you say so. But that man behind me, his name is James, and he is in real trouble." Penny looked past him. The middle rider had gotten James up onto his knees, but James's eyes were closing. The frost on his eyelashes did not melt when he blinked. She thought about the rule. She thought about the storm. She thought about how the fire in the stove was already small and how she did not know what was wrong with it and how she had been alone for 19 hours. "You have to take your boots off," she said. The big man with the beard, Axel Cross, the man called Iron, looked at her for one long second. And then very slowly, like she had said something that meant a great deal more than what the words said, he nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We will." He turned his head and said one word over his shoulder, the same word, soft. "Boots." And the other two men, the two huge, frightening men with ice in their beards and patches on their jackets, set down the man named James as gently as if he were made of glass, and they began to unlace their boots there on the porch in a screaming Vermont blizzard, because a girl who weighed 60 pounds and stood 4 feet tall had told them they had to. They came in one at a time. Axel first, his boots in his hand, then the middle rider carrying James between his own shoulder and the wall, half walking him, half lifting him. Then the third one, the youngest, broad-shouldered, snow falling off him in soft sheets onto the braided rug in the entryway. None of them stepped past the entryway. They stood there in their stocking feet, dripping, and they waited. Penny stood with her back almost against the wall. Axel Cross looked down at her, and his face did something Penny had never seen a grown man's face do before. It softened, not all at once, in pieces, the way ice gives slow and careful when warm water gets under it. "Where can we put him, sweetheart?" She pointed, not trusting her voice yet. There was an old wooden chair by the coat rack, the one her grandfather had built before Penny was born. The middle rider lowered James into it like he was lowering a man into a hospital bed. James's head fell back against the wall, and his breathing was loud and uneven, and the youngest rider, the broad one, looked at Penny and asked, "Ma'am, is there a quilt I could fetch?" "Ma'am," he had called her ma'am. She nodded toward the couch, and he went and got the heavy quilt off the back of it, the one her grandmother had pieced together herself, with squares of her old dresses, and he brought it back and tucked it around James every corner the way a person tucks a child in. Then he stepped back. He stepped back, and so did the middle rider, until the three of them were standing in a loose half circle around the door and the chair, leaving Penny the entire rest of the room. She had not realized she had been holding her breath until then. "My name's Ronald," the broad-shouldered young one said. He had a steady, plain voice. "The one with the bad lungs is James. The fellow there is Raymond, but everyone calls him Patch. He's our medic. And the one talking to you is Axel. We rode in from Burlington this afternoon. The storm came up faster than the weather said it would. We're trying to get back to the chapter house, but we are not going to make it tonight." Penny looked at the man named Patch. He was already kneeling beside James, peeling off James's wet gloves, rubbing his hands between his own to bring the blood back. He had a small bag at his hip, and from it he took a thin black thermometer and a packet of foil hand warmers, the kind hunters used. Penny had seen the same kind of hand warmers in her grandmother's hunting drawer. "Sweetheart," Axel said. He had not moved from where he had crouched in the entryway. "I need to ask you a question, and you are not in trouble no matter how you answer it. Are your folks upstairs?" Penny opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at the floor. The silence in the room got bigger and bigger, and finally she said, very small, "No, sir." "They're at the neighbors," he asked gently. She shook her head. "They're at work." She shook her head again, and then, because she did not know what else to do, she lifted her hand and pointed at the photographs on the refrigerator. The one with the soldier and the smiling young woman. The one with her grandmother holding a pie. The one with Penny missing her 2 front teeth. "Daddy's in heaven," she said. Her voice did not shake, but it was very thin. "Mama, too. I never knew her, and Grandma Helen, she went 3 weeks ago." The 3 big men did not move. They did not move at all. Patch's hand stopped on James's wrist. Ronald looked at the floor. Axel Cross stayed exactly where he was, on one knee in the entryway of a dead woman's house, and Penny watched his face change again. This time it was not the ice softening. This time it was the look a man got when somebody had handed him something heavy and he was deciding to carry it. "I'm sorry, Penny," he said. She blinked. "How do you know my name?" He lifted his chin very slowly toward the refrigerator. There was a crayon drawing pinned up with a magnet shaped like a black and white cow. At the bottom of it, in purple capital letters, it said, "Penny and Grandma Helen, Spring Picnic." "Oh," she said. And then, for no reason she could explain to herself later, she walked across the room, picked up the bag of hand warmers from the floor where Patch had set them, and brought one to Axel Cross. She held it out to him in both hands. "For your fingers," she said. "They look bad." He looked at the foil packet. He looked at her. And the big man with the beard and the Hell's Angels patch took the packet out of her small hand as carefully as he would have taken something out of the hand of a queen. And he said, "Thank you, ma'am." The fire in the stove popped behind them. Penny turned around to look at it. The flame was lower now than it had been an hour ago. She could see it leaning sideways behind the iron grate. Axel followed her eyes. So did Ronald. So did Patch. Three men in leather jackets with snow melting off them, looking at a wood stove, the way men look at a sleeping baby that has stopped breathing right. "How long has it been doing that?" Axel asked. "All night," Penny said. "I tried to put more wood in, but the big logs are outside, and I am not allowed to use the hatchet." "Good," Axel said, the same way he had said boots. That is a rule worth keeping. Patch stood up from James and walked over to the stove. He did not touch it. He bent down close to the seams of the iron door and breathed in through his nose, and then he straightened up and looked at Axel, and something passed between them that Penny did not understand but immediately did not like. "Rook," Patch said quietly. "I know," Axel said. "Sweetheart," Patch said to Penny, and his voice was gentler than it had been all night. "Where did you sleep last night?" Penny pointed at the floor in front of the stove where she had pulled the cushions off the couch and made a kind of nest in front of the fire so she would not be cold. Patch closed his eyes for a half second, just a half second. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Axel stood up slowly from where he had been kneeling. He was very tall when he was standing. The top of his head almost brushed the doorframe. Penny took half a step back without meaning to. He saw her step back. He stopped where he was. "Penny," he said, "I need you to listen to me, all right? You are not in trouble. You have not done anything wrong. But I think there might be something wrong with your stove. And I think that is why you have been so sleepy and why James got so bad on the road so fast, because James gets bad when the air goes wrong on him too. So we are going to fix it. We're going to crack a window. We're going to look at the pipe. We are going to make this house safe for you. Is that all right?" Penny did not know what carbon monoxide was. She did not know it could kill a child sleeping by a stove. She did not know that the lady from the county would later come back and stand in this very kitchen with tears in her eyes saying she should have come yesterday, she should have come yesterday. But she heard what Axel Cross was telling her. Underneath the words, she heard it. She had been in danger, and these men her grandmother would not have invited for supper, had walked through a blizzard and into her front door and seen it inside of 3 minutes. "Yes, sir," she said. "Good girl," Axel said. And then, because he was a man who had once been told by another man on the floor of a desert outpost that nobody had to be made of stone to be worth something, he held out his hand to her palm, up the way a person holds out a hand to a dog that does not know yet whether to trust. Penny looked at his hand. She looked at the burn scars across his knuckles. She looked at the silver ring on his middle finger, plain and heavy. She looked at the patch on his chest that she had been taught all her short life to be afraid of. And then she put her small hand in his. His hand closed around hers, careful as anything she had ever felt. "All right, ma'am," he said. "Let's go save your house." Patch and Ronald moved at the same time. Patch went back to James, opened the smallest window in the parlor 2 inches, then came and opened the kitchen window the same. Ronald pulled out a small black device the size of a deck of cards from a pouch on his hip and pressed a button on it, and after a half minute, the device began to chirp a thin electronic sound that Penny had never heard before in her life, but that she would never forget. Axel did not let go of her hand. "That sound," she said, watching the little chirping box on the kitchen table. "What is it?" "It's an alarm, sweetheart," Axel said. "It means the air in this house has too much of something bad in it. Something you cannot smell. Something we can fix." "How do you fix it?" "By doing exactly what we are doing right now. Cracking the windows. Letting the stove cool. Finding out what's wrong with the pipe. By morning, the air will be clean and you will be safe." Penny was quiet. "Mr. Cross," she said. "Iron, sweetheart, or Rook. Either one." "Mr. Rook." She looked up at him. If you had not come, would I have woken up? He did not answer her right away. He looked down at her, and the lines around his eyes got tight, and after a long moment he said, I am very glad we knocked on your door, Penny. She did not push the question. She was 8 years old, but she was old enough not to push. Outside, the wind kept screaming. Inside, the little black box kept chirping. James groaned softly under the quilt by the door. Patch put another hand warmer between his palms and rubbed them gently. Ronald shook the snow off the toes of his boots into a neat pile by the wall, and then bent down to wipe the floor with one of the dish towels from the kitchen, asking permission first with a glance Penny barely caught. It was somewhere then, standing in her grandmother's kitchen with her hand still in the hand of a man with a Hell's Angels patch on his chest, that the photograph on the refrigerator caught Axel Cross's eye. He went very still, the whole way still, the kind of still a man goes when something he has been carrying for 14 years steps out of a frame and looks straight at him. Penny, he said. His voice had changed. Penny, who is that man in the desert picture? She turned her head and looked at the refrigerator. There were a lot of pictures up there. The one with her at the spring picnic, the one with Grandma Helen in the pot, the wedding picture, and the one Axel was looking at, the one Penny knew by heart because she had looked at it every single day of her life. A young man in desert camouflage helmet, under his arm, dust on his face, his arm around a smiling young woman in a yellow sundress, both of them squinting into the sun in front of a cinder block wall somewhere very far from Vermont. That's Daddy, Penny said. Cody Boone. He was in the Army. He died when I was 2. And that's my mama. She died in the car the same year after. Axel Cross did not say anything. He stood there in his stocking feet in a Vermont kitchen with his hand still around the hand of an 8-year-old girl, and he looked at the photograph on the refrigerator for so long that Patch eventually came over and stood beside him. Rook, Patch said. Axel did not answer. Penny tugged once gently on his hand. Mr. Rook. He looked down at her. His eyes were wet. She had not expected that. She had not expected a man like Axel Cross to have eyes that could get wet. Sweetheart, he said. His voice was so quiet she had to lean forward to hear him. I knew your daddy. The kitchen went silent. The wind outside did not. The wind did not care. But inside the house, inside the kitchen, with the little chirping box on the table and the cooling stove and the cracked windows, every other sound stopped. You knew Daddy, Penny whispered. Yes, ma'am. A long time ago, in a place a long way from here. Was he your friend? Axel Cross was quiet for a long time. He looked at the photograph again. Then he looked back down at Penny. He was better to me than I deserved, sweetheart, he said. There was a night in a bad place where I sat down on a concrete floor and I did not think I was going to get up again. Your daddy sat down beside me. He did not talk fast and he did not talk big. He just sat next to me. And after a long while, he said, you don't have to be made of stone to be worth something. And that was enough for me to get up. Some things you just remember. Penny stared up at him. Then she did something he was not expecting. She took her hand out of his and she walked across the kitchen and she opened the bottom drawer of the buffet where her grandmother kept the family things. She took out a small wooden box with a brass latch. She brought it back to him and held it up. It's his, she said. Grandma said when I was big enough, I could look in it. I'm not big enough yet, but maybe you are. Axel Cross took the wooden box in his 2 huge hands the way another man might have taken a newborn baby. He did not open it. He just held it and looked at her, and after a long moment he said, Penny, I'm going to make you a promise, and it's an important one, so I want you to hear it. We are not leaving you tonight. We are not leaving you in the morning either. Not until we are sure that the people coming for you are good people and that what comes next for you is right. Do you understand? She nodded slowly. I promised your daddy a long time ago that I would pay him back someday for what he did for me on that floor. I never figured I would get the chance, but I am going to take it now with your permission. Is that right? She did not understand all of it, but she understood enough. Yes, sir, she said. Outside the farmhouse, the storm had buried the road and the wires and the trucks and the world. Inside the farmhouse, a wood stove cooled. A small black box chirped. An old man named James started to come back to himself under a quilt sewn by a dead woman's hands. A young biker named Ronald quietly opened a window an inch wider, and a man named Axel Cross stood holding a wooden box he had not earned the right to open yet in the kitchen of a man he had loved like a brother and lost in a country full of dust. He looked down at Penny Boone. "All right, ma'am," he said for the second time that night. "Let's go save your house." And on the porch boards outside the door, hidden under the new snow that was already bearing the tracks of 3 motorcycles, was the first faint print of a car tire that had not been there when the bikers arrived. Just one, coming up, stopping, and turning around. Penny Boone did not see it. Axel Cross did not see it. But somebody had driven up to the farmhouse all the way to the porch steps sometime between when the power went out and when the bikers had knocked on the door. And whoever it was had seen the candles in the window, had seen the smoke coming weak out of the chimney, had seen the 8-year-old child rocking alone in her grandmother's chair. And then they had turned around in the snow and driven away, without knocking. The big clock in the kitchen ticked toward 1 in the morning. The wind kept screaming. And in a back office of a square brick building 40 miles south on a road that no plow had touched in 8 hours, a desk lamp was still burning. A man in a wool suit was sitting in front of a green ledger. He had a glass of bourbon at his elbow and a black telephone receiver pressed against his ear. "I drove out there myself tonight," he was saying. He kept his voice low even though the building was empty. "Roads are bad, no power, just a little girl. Won't be a problem. Soon as this storm clears, we move on it. Stephen flies in Tuesday. Have the deed ready." He listened. He smiled a small, thin smile that did not reach his eyes. "No," he said. "Nobody else is out there. Who would be?" He set the receiver down very carefully, and he opened the green ledger to a page that had Helen Boone's name written across the top in his own handwriting, and a forged signature down at the bottom that was not. In the farmhouse, Penny Boone watched the snow throw itself against the kitchen window and thought for the first time in 3 weeks that maybe she was not entirely alone in the world. She did not know yet how right she was. She did not know yet how much she was going to need to be. Axel Cross set the wooden box on the kitchen table without opening it. He treated it the way a man treats a folded flag at a funeral. He did not stop touching it for a long moment after he had set it down. Then he straightened. "Ronald," he said quietly, "the radio in my saddlebag. Bring it in. Bring the spare battery too." "Yes, sir," Ronald said. Patch was already in the parlor with James, his voice low and even, telling James a story about a burger place in Tulsa where the cook had once dropped a whole pan of bacon on a sleeping cat. James kept opening his eyes and closing them again. Patch did not let him close them for long. Axel walked the downstairs of the house with Penny half a step behind him. He did not touch anything. He did not open any doors. He stopped at the doorway of every room and looked and asked before stepping in. In the parlor, he checked the windows. In the hallway, he checked the towel Penny had stuffed under the door to the basement to keep the cold air from coming up. He put his palm against the radiator under the front window and shook his head once, the way a man shakes his head at a horse that has run lame. "Smart," he said about the towel. Penny ducked her chin. "I saw Grandma do it," she said. "That is how smart works, sweetheart. We see other people who knew and we remember." Ronald came back in with the radio and the spare battery and snow up to his knees, and Axel cleared a space on the kitchen table and set the radio down. It was a black box with a small antenna and a row of square buttons across the front. He hit 2 of the buttons. The radio crackled. He turned a dial. The crackle thinned. Then a man's voice came through it, tired and clear, reading numbers off a list. "County emergency," Axel said to Penny. "They keep a channel open in weather like this. I'm going to talk to them, sweetheart. I'm going to tell them where you are and who is here with you. The lady from the county is going to hear it. The hospital is going to hear it. Anyone who is listening on that frequency for a child is going to hear it. That is on purpose. I want it on the record that we knocked and that you let us in and that we have been treating this house like a home. Do you understand?" She nodded. "If they ask to talk to you, will you talk to them?" She thought about it. "If you stand beside me," she said. "I will stand beside you." "Then yes, sir." He keyed the radio. "This is Axel Cross," he said. His voice over the radio sounded different than it sounded in the room. It sounded older, more official, like a man giving testimony. "I am calling from the Whitmore farmhouse on County Road 12 west of Pine Hollow, Vermont. We have 1 minor child in the residence, 8 years old female. Name is Penny Boone. Her grandmother and legal guardian, Helen Whitmore Boone, deceased 3 weeks ago. The child has been alone in the residence approximately 19 hours. Power is out. Phone is out. We have detected a carbon monoxide situation with the wood stove and have ventilated the house. The child is alert and stable. We have 3 adults present with her, all members of the Burlington chapter, all known to local law enforcement by name. We will require a welfare check and a wellness evaluation for the child as soon as the road opens. We will require a stove inspection. We will not be leaving the residence before that welfare check arrives. Please confirm. There was a long burst of static. Then a woman's voice came back through it. Confirmed, Mr. Cross, the woman said. We have you. Stand by. He set the radio down. What happens now? Penny asked. Now Axel said we wait. They waited a long time. Patch ventilated James enough to put color back in his cheeks. Ronald split kindling on the back porch with a small camp hatchet of his own and brought enough in to keep the stove warm at a lower draft, which Patch said would be safer for now as long as the windows stayed cracked the way they were. The little black chirping box on the table went quiet for a stretch and then chirped again, lower, less urgent. Each time it chirped, Axel reset the windows by a quarter inch. The cold air slid in around their ankles. Nobody complained. Around 2 in the morning, the radio came back to life. Mr. Cross, this is dispatch. We are patching you through to Margaret Holden County Social Services. Stand by. Axel set the radio between himself and Penny on the table. Mr. Cross said, a new voice. A woman, older, warm. This is Margaret Holden. I have been trying to reach the Boone residence for 3 days. I am very glad to hear your voice on this channel. Is the child available to speak? She is right next to me, ma'am. Mr. Cross, before you put her on the line, I want you to know 2 things. First, my office has been actively searching for the child's maternal first cousin, Linda Whitmore, since the death of Helen Boone. Ms. Whitmore is a school teacher in New Hampshire. We finally reached her at her work address 40 minutes ago. She is on her way. She has been told that her cousin is alive. She has been told that her cousin's grandmother is not. She is not taking it well, but she is in her car. Second, there is a notice on this house from the county tax office. There is also a notice on this house from a private legal firm in Burlington. The second one came in this morning. I do not like the look of it. I am not going to explain the second one over an open radio channel. I will be coming up to the residence personally as soon as the road opens. Is that acceptable? Yes, ma'am, Axel said. His face had gone hard around the eyes again. Around what time should we expect you? I am told 8 in the morning. I will be earlier if I can. Thank you, ma'am. May I speak with Penny? He looked at Penny. She nodded. He held the radio out to her low enough she could lean her chin on the table next to it. Hello, ma'am, Penny said. Hello, sweetheart. Are you warm? Yes, ma'am. Are you hungry? A little. Have these men been kind to you? Penny looked at the kitchen. Patch was sitting on a stool by the parlor doorway with his head against the wall, eyes closed for 1 minute of rest. Ronald was at the back door, knocking snow off the new logs before he brought them in. Axel was sitting beside her on the kitchen bench, both his big hands flat on the table watching her. Yes, ma'am, Penny said. They have been very kind. Tell me one thing they did, Penny thought. They took off their boots, she said. There was a small pause. Then Margaret Holden, 60 miles south in an old office building, with her own coat already on, and her own car already running outside in the snow, made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost not. That is a good sign, sweetheart, Margaret Holden said. Penny, my name is Margaret. I am going to come and see you in the morning. I am not going to take you anywhere you do not want to go. I am going to bring you breakfast. I am going to bring your cousin Linda if she beats me there. Will you wait for me? Yes, ma'am. Good girl. The radio went quiet. Penny set it down very carefully on the table. Mr. Rook, she said. Yes, ma'am. Is this the right way? The way her grandmother had said the words came back into her mouth without her thinking about it. The right way. Axel had said the same words on the porch more or less. He knew what she was asking. He did not pretend not to. This is the right way, sweetheart, he said. We told the truth. We told them where you are. We told them what is wrong with the house. We did not hide anything. We are waiting for the people whose job it is to help you. That is the right way. There is no other right way that I know of. She thought about that for a long time. Mr. Rook. Yes, ma'am. If they take me, will you find me? The kitchen got very quiet. Axel Cross turned in his seat on the bench so that he was facing her square. He put both his hands flat on the table on either side of her small ones so that she was almost inside a kind of fence made of his arms. He did not touch her. He did not crowd her. He just made himself into a wall around her on 3 sides. Penny, he said, they are not going to take you tonight. They are not going to take you tomorrow either, not the way you mean. They are looking for your Aunt Linda right now, and they have found her, and she is in her car driving up here. That means tomorrow you are going to have a relative in this house who wants you. That changes everything. That is the first and best thing. Do you understand?" She nodded. "But suppose," she said, "just suppose. Just suppose," he said. "Then yes, ma'am, I will find you. I will be polite about it. I will not break any laws. But I will find you, and I will bring Mr. Pierce with me, and I will bring Mrs. Holden with me, and I will bring however many people I have to bring. We will find you. Do you hear me?" Penny did not cry. She had cried enough this week, but her throat got very tight, and she put her small hand flat on the table inside the fence of his arms, and she nodded. "Yes, sir," she said, "I hear you." He sat back. The radio crackled once and went quiet. Outside, somewhere very far off, an engine started up in the snow. A snowplow. The first one miles away, beginning to dig the world out of its hole. Inside, in the kitchen of her grandmother's house, with a stove cooling down, and a little black box chirping low, and a quilt on a chair by the door, and 3 large men in stocking feet trying very hard not to make any sound that would scare her, Penny Boone laid her head down sideways on the kitchen table, inside the fence of Axel Cross's arms, and she closed her eyes, and for the first time in 19 hours, she slept. Morning came pale and quiet, and for the first hour, Penny Boone forgot the world had ever been any other way. She woke up in her own bed, under 3 blankets, with her grandmother's gray cardigan still buttoned over her pajamas, and the silver cross warm against her collarbone. The quilt that had been on the back of the couch downstairs was tucked around her, and someone had left a small glass of water on the nightstand beside her, and someone she could tell from the smell of wood smoke and bacon and coffee that was drifting up the staircase was making breakfast in her kitchen. She lay very still and listened. There were voices downstairs, low, careful voices, the kind of voices grown men used when they thought a child was still sleeping. There was the soft clink of a coffee mug on the kitchen counter. There was the squeak of the back door opening, then closing. There was the sound of a generator running outside steady and even, and somewhere out beyond the porch, she could hear a chainsaw start up, and then stop, and then start again. She had not heard so many human sounds in her house since before the funeral. She got out of bed in her socked feet and walked to her bedroom window and pulled back the curtain. The world had been buried alive. The snow was higher than her grandmother's pickup truck. It had drifted up against the side of the barn until the small door was gone. The yard, the driveway, the fence, the road, all of it had been smoothed under one long, unbroken sheet of white, and the sky above it was the color of an old bed sheet, low and gray with no sun yet. But the driveway was not empty. There were motorcycles in it. She counted them. There were many more than 3. There were 8, 10, 12 more than she could count, quickly drawn up in 2 careful rows beside the barn, their chrome wiped clean of ice. There were 3 pickup trucks parked behind them. There was a flatbed trailer with lumber strapped to it under a blue tarp. There was a van with a red cross painted on the side, and beside it a county snowplow had pulled up and stopped, its yellow lights still spinning slowly. A woman in a long green coat was carrying a basket up the shoveled path to the front porch. Penny pressed her forehead to the cold glass and watched as the woman handed the basket to Ronald Bishop, who took off his glove to take it and said something to her that made her laugh. She backed away from the window very slowly. Then she went downstairs. The first person she saw at the bottom of the stairs was a stranger. He was a man in his 60s with a clean-shaven arm and a sheriff's department parka, and he had a clipboard balanced against one knee and a coffee mug from her grandmother's cabinet in his other hand. He saw her at the bottom of the stairs and stood up immediately. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said. His voice was kind. He set the coffee down on a side table the way a guest sets down a coffee. "My name is Deputy Hank Carver. Your friend Mr. Cross is in the kitchen with the nurse. Would you like me to walk you in?" Penny nodded once small. The kitchen was full of people. There was Axel Cross at the table, his hair wet from snow, the leather jacket gone, just a dark sweater, and his sleeves rolled up. There was a heavy-set woman with a county badge clipped to her green coat sitting across from him, writing things down on a yellow pad. There was a nurse in scrubs and a parka standing at the counter with a thermometer in her hand. There was Patch on a wooden stool by the wood stove, his elbows on his knees, watching the flame as a man watches a sleeping dog. There was a man Penny had not seen the night before in a navy down vest, mid-40s, with a gray ponytail and rimless glasses, sitting at the far end of the table with a thick yellow folder open in front of him. When she walked in, all of them stopped. Axel was on his feet first. "Hey, ma'am," he said, very gentle. "Sleep all right?" She nodded. She could not find words yet. The woman in the green coat stood up too, but she did not come around the table. She just smiled, slow and careful, with her hands flat on the wood. "Hello, Penny. My name is Mrs. Margaret Holden. I work for the county. We spoke last night on the radio. I am here to help, not to take anything. Is it all right if we talk for a few minutes?" Penny looked at Axel. Axel nodded once, slow. "She's a friend, sweetheart. I checked." Penny walked the rest of the way into the kitchen. The nurse came over and crouched and asked if she could check her temperature. Penny held still under the cool press of the thermometer at her temple. The nurse looked at the number and smiled. 98.4. "You're a champion." "There's pancakes on the back burner, ma'am," Axel said. "And bacon." And the lady from the church brought a thermos of hot chocolate. "Mr. Bishop made the pancakes. He claims they're edible. I make no promises." Ronald at the stove snorted softly without turning around. Penny almost smiled. She sat at her grandmother's table in her grandmother's kitchen, and a young biker named Ronald Bishop slid a plate of pancakes in front of her with the seriousness of a waiter at a fine restaurant, and the man with the gray ponytail at the end of the table waited politely for her to take her first bite before he spoke. "Penny," he said, "my name is Thomas Pierce. The boys call me Deacon. I rode in with the second group this morning. Before I rode bikes, I was a lawyer a long time ago in Boston. Mr. Cross asked if I would take a look at some of the paperwork on your grandmother's table. I want to ask your permission first. Is that all right?" Penny looked at the red-lettered envelope on the table. She had been afraid of that envelope for 3 weeks. She had carried it from the counter to the table and back so many times it had a soft crease across its middle. "Yes, sir," she said. Deacon nodded. He did not touch the envelope yet. He turned to Mrs. Holden instead. "Ma'am, before we go further, I'd like to confirm the procedural piece. Penny is a minor sole resident, no living parent, paternal grandmother deceased 3 weeks ago. Maternal side, none on record," Mrs. Holden said quietly. "Mother's family was killed in the same accident the mother died in. Father had one sibling, an older brother, last known address California. We have been trying to locate him for 2 weeks. There is also a maternal first cousin, Linda Whitmore, schoolteacher in New Hampshire. She is on her way. She was reached at 4 this morning and got in her car. Roads are slow. She should be here by noon." Penny put down her fork. "Aunt Linda is coming." Mrs. Holden's face softened. "Yes, sweetheart, she is. I have not seen her since I was little. She told me to tell you," Mrs. Holden said, and she opened a small notebook and read from it carefully that she has been trying to call this house for 3 weeks and has not been able to get through, and she did not know your grandmother had died and that she is very, very sorry. She also said to tell you that she still has the bird book you sent her 2 birthdays ago." Penny's eyes got hot. She picked up her fork again so she would not have to talk. Axel Cross looked at the wall for a moment, like a man giving a child privacy by looking somewhere else, and when he turned back, his voice was easy. "Eat, ma'am," he said. "Long morning." The first hour was paperwork. Deacon Pierce sat on one side of the table with the bank envelope and a thick yellow folder full of pages with sticky tabs. Mrs. Holden sat on the other with her own folder. The deputy with the kind voice, Hank Carver, came in and out with updates from the road. The county nurse checked Penny's blood pressure once, and her pulse twice, and her color 3 times, and pronounced her stable, but advised Mrs. Holden in a low voice that the child needed quiet and food and warmth more than she needed any one specific thing. The wood stove was no longer the wood stove. A new black electric heater hummed in the corner where the stove used to draft. A new carbon monoxide alarm had been mounted up by the kitchen ceiling. Patch had labeled the old stove with a piece of masking tape that said, "Do not light, unsafe flue, wait for inspector." Outside in the yard, Ronald and 3 other riders were clearing the path to the woodshed. The man Penny had heard with the chainsaw turned out to be Wade Holden, no relation to Mrs. Holden, a member of the local volunteer fire department who had ridden in on a snowmobile. He was splitting kindling and stacking it neatly by the back porch. By 10 in the morning, Deacon Pierce closed the bank envelope and set it gently down on the table. He took off his rimless glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "All right," he said. "This is mostly straightforward. Property tax arrears, about $4,000. Final hospital bill from the paternal grandmother's last admission, about $14,000. There is a county lien notice attached that gives the heirs 90 days from notice of death to either pay or arrange a payment plan. The notice was issued 17 days ago. We have time. He paused. There is one other item, he said, and his voice went a half step quieter. I would like to look at it more carefully before I say anything about it. May I take it with me to the parlor with Mr. Cross? Mrs. Holden nodded. Axel stood. Penny watched them go. She could not have said why, but something in the way Deacon's hand closed around the green folder he had pulled out from underneath the bank envelope made her stomach pull tight. It was not the red-lettered envelope. It was the green one. She had not noticed the green one before. The parlor door closed behind them. Penny ate 3 bites of pancake and could not eat any more. She put her fork down. Mrs. Holden noticed. Sweetheart, she said, would you like to come sit on the couch with me for a few minutes? Not the parlor couch, the little one in the sunroom. We can leave the kitchen and the lawyers to it. Penny followed her into the sunroom. The sunroom had been her grandmother's favorite. It faced east. In the summer, the lilac came up against the windows. Now there was only snow, but the light through the windows was clean and white, and the cushions on the small love seat still smelled like her grandmother's lavender. Mrs. Holden sat. Penny sat. Mrs. Holden did not touch her. I want to tell you what is going to happen today, Mrs. Holden said, and I want you to ask me any question you have. There are no wrong questions. There are no questions I will be mad about. Is that all right? Penny nodded. Your Aunt Linda is coming. She is going to stay with you. Probably here in this house if everything checks out, although it may be a few days in a hotel in town until the inspector can sign off on the stove and the wiring. You are not going into foster care today. Do you understand me, sweetheart? Not today, not tomorrow. We have a relative who wants you. That is the first and best path, and we are going to do everything to walk it. Penny's chest did something that she could not control. It got tight and loose at the same time. She did not cry, but her eyes filled and her nose stung. I am not going to be taken away. No, sweetheart. Not by me. Not today. What about the house? Mrs. Holden paused. It was the kind of pause grown-ups did when they were not sure how much truth a child could carry. That is a different question, Mrs. Holden said, and I am not the person who answers it. The lawyer in there with Mr. Cross, Mr. Pierce, he is a very good lawyer, and he is looking at it right now. But Penny, I have to tell you this honestly. There are things in your grandmother's paperwork that I do not understand yet. Mr. Pierce thinks something may be wrong with one of the documents. He wants more time to be sure. Until then, I want you to do exactly what your grandmother would have wanted you to do, which is eat your pancakes and let the grown-ups work. Penny nodded. Then very small, she said, Mr. Rook says we do the right fight the right way. Mrs. Holden looked at her for a long moment. That sounds like good advice, she said. The Cadillac came up the cleared driveway at 20 minutes after 11. It was black and so clean it looked like nothing had touched it on the way out, which was a strange thing for any vehicle that morning, because every other car on every road in the county was caked gray with road salt and slush. The Cadillac came up the drive at the speed of a hearse, and it parked behind the snowplow without asking anybody, and 3 men got out of it. The first was a tall, well-dressed man in his late 50s in a long wool coat. His silver hair was cut short. He carried a leather briefcase. He had not been outside long enough that morning to be cold, and you could tell. The second was a younger man in his 40s in a 2 new green parka over a suit jacket. He was a head shorter than the first. He had Cody Boone's eyes, not warm like Cody's, the same shape, the same color, but flat. He looked at the farmhouse like he was estimating its square footage. The third was a deputy, but it was not Hank Carver. It was a deputy Hank Carver did not appear to know. Hank had been on the porch with a cup of coffee when the Cadillac pulled in. Penny, watching from the sunroom window, saw Hank Carver go very still, the way a man goes still when he sees someone he was not expecting and does not particularly want to see. The second deputy was named Patrick Locke. He wore the same uniform as Hank Carver, but he wore it differently. He walked up the porch steps like he owned the porch. He shook the tall, well-dressed man's hand at the top of the steps as if they had shaken hands many times before. He did not shake Hank Carver's. Mrs. Holden stood up from the love seat slowly. Penny, she said, I would like you to stay right here, sweetheart, with the door closed. Do not come out unless I or Mr. Cross comes to get you. Is that all right? Penny nodded. Mrs. Holden left the sunroom and closed the door. Penny got up on her knees on the love seat and pressed her face to the inside of the door. There was a thin gap at the bottom. She could hear. She heard the front door open. She heard the man in the wool coat say, "Good morning. My name is William Cobb. I represent the estate of Helen Whitmore Boone. I am here on behalf of her surviving heir, her son, Stephen Whitmore. We were not made aware until this morning that anyone besides the granddaughter was on the premises. May we come in?" There was a beat of silence. Then Axel Cross's voice, calm as a frozen lake, said, "By all means, counselor. Come in." Penny had never heard Axel sound like that. She had heard him sound rough. She had heard him sound tired. She had heard him sound gentle. She had never heard him sound that way. The way he sounded then was the way a man sounds when he has already decided the outcome of a fight before he throws a single punch. She heard them come into the entryway. She heard William Cobb saying smooth and you would be. She heard Axel say Axel Cross, a friend of the family. "I see," Cobb said. "And whose family would that be?" "Cody Boone, Sir," Axel said. "Among others?" There was a pause. "Well, Mr. Cross," Cobb said, "I'm afraid I will need to ask all non-essential parties to clear the residence. I am here with a court notice claim of mortgage assumption against this property. I will be reading it out, and Deputy Locke here will be witnessing service to the heir. Once it is read, the heir, Mr. Whitmore, will be assuming temporary custody of the property pending." Counselor Deacon Pierce's voice, smooth and easy and a little amused. "You will not be reading anything out, and Deputy Locke will not be witnessing anything, and Mr. Whitmore will not be assuming custody of anything until I have seen what you propose to read. My name is Thomas Pierce. I am admitted to the bar in 5 states, including this one. I am the child's interim legal representative as of 9:15 this morning, and I would like to see the document." There was a long, ugly silence. Penny pressed her face harder against the door. "You are representing a child," Cobb said. The smooth had gone half a degree thinner. "Pro bono." "Pro bono. Through which organization?" "Veterans Legal Aid of Vermont. Volunteer Council. We're new this year. We are very enthusiastic." There was another silence. "May I see your bar number?" "You may, counselor, after I see your document." The sound that came out of William Cobb then was very small. It was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. Penny had heard her grandmother make a sound like it once the day a man had come to the door selling roofs, and her grandmother had told him to step off her porch, please, before she made him do it. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Pierce." "On the contrary, counselor, this is highly regular. The child is represented. You will speak through her counsel, or you will speak to a courtroom on Monday. Which would you prefer?" The other deputy, the new one, Patrick Locke, said, "I think we're getting off on the wrong foot here. Mr. Cobb has driven a long way. There is a minor child in residence with what appears to be a number of unauthorized adults. Mr. Cross, I believe you said your name was?" "I did," Axel said. "Mr. Cross, could I see some identification?" "Sure thing, deputy," after Counselor Pierce sees the document. Funny how those things always come at the same time. There was a long quiet. Penny held her breath. She heard a chair scrape. She heard the sound of leather. She heard the rustle of paper. She heard William Cobb say very tight, "By all means, Mr. Pierce, please review." She heard Deacon Pierce sit down at her grandmother's kitchen table. She heard nothing else for a long time. Then she heard Deacon Pierce say very quietly, "Counselor, may I see the original signature page?" "Yes." "Thank you." Another long quiet. Then Deacon Pierce's voice, still quiet, said the thing Penny would think about later for a long, long time. The way she thought about her grandmother pressing the cross into her palm, the way she thought about her father in the desert photograph, the way she thought about Axel Cross kneeling on the porch boards at midnight, saying boots. Counselor Deacon Pierce said, "What was the date of Mrs. Boone's signature on this document?" A pause. "October 18th of last year." "That is correct." "And in your firm's records, Mr. Cobb, would Mrs. Boone have signed this in person or by power of attorney?" "In person in our offices." "On October 18th. On October 18th. In Burlington." "In Burlington." The silence in the kitchen got very, very thin. "Mr. Cobb," Deacon Pierce said almost kindly, "would you do me the great courtesy of pulling out your phone and looking up the admission records of Mercy Memorial Hospital for Helen Whitmore Boone in October of last year?" There was a sound. It might have been a sharp breath. "That is not necessary, Mr. Pierce. I do not have to perform." "Take your time, counselor. I have all morning." Another long quiet. Then Axel Cross' voice, as level and quiet as he had used at midnight on the porch, said, "I have her admission records right here, counselor. Mrs. Holden was kind enough to pull them while we were waiting. Mrs. Boone was admitted to Mercy Memorial on October 15th in respiratory distress secondary to her pneumonia. She was placed on a ventilator on October 16th. She was not extubated until October 22nd. She was not lucid conscious or capable of signing her own name on October 18th, counselor. She was on a ventilator in a hospital 60 miles from your office. So I would like you to tell me, slowly in front of two deputies and a county social worker and a lawyer and a wood stove, how Mrs. Boone signed a document in your office that day. The sunroom was so quiet, Penny could hear her own heart. This is a misunderstanding, William Cobb said. I'm sure it is, counselor. There is a clerical error somewhere. I am sure there is. There is no need for. Deputy Locke Axelcross said, I would like to file a complaint. There was a chair scrape. Sir, said Patrick Locke, I am going to have to ask you to stand down. This is between Mr. Cobb and Mr. Pierce, as a matter of jurisdiction. As a matter of jurisdiction, Deputy said Hank Carver from the doorway, and Penny could tell from the new flat steel in his voice that Hank Carver had been listening the whole time. I'd like you to step out onto the porch with me for a moment. Now. Excuse me. Now, Deputy. There was a long, quiet pause and then the sound of two pairs of boots heading toward the front door. Penny did not breathe. The door opened. The door closed. The kitchen was quiet. Then William Cobb said in a different voice, in a much smaller voice, gentlemen, I would like to consult with my client privately. Of course, Deacon Pierce said, we will give you the porch. Outside. You walked in a coat, counselor. You will be fined for 10 minutes. Penny heard another set of boots and a quieter set of dress shoes, and the front door opened and closed again. And in the kitchen of her grandmother's house, there were only 3 people left. Now Mrs. Holden Axelcross and Deacon Pierce. Penny opened the sunroom door very quietly. She walked across the living room. She stopped in the kitchen doorway in her socks and her grandmother's gray cardigan and her silver cross, and she looked up at Axelcross. His face was hard. He saw her and his face changed. He went down on one knee in her grandmother's kitchen for the second time in 12 hours. Hey, ma'am, he said. They tried to steal my house, she said. He did not lie to her. Yes, ma'am, they tried. Did they win? He looked at Deacon Pierce. Deacon Pierce looked at Penny. His voice was the same gentle voice he had used at the kitchen table about pancakes. Penny, Deacon said, we are at the very beginning of a long road, but I want to tell you something true. The man in the wool coat just lied to me about a date he should have remembered. I caught him. He knows I caught him. Right now he is on the porch with his client trying to figure out how to walk that back. He will not be able to. We have the hospital records. We have the witness statements. We have the times. The numbers do not lie, sweetheart, no matter how nice the wool coat is. The numbers do not lie. Penny looked at Axelcross. What about Daddy's brother? Axel was quiet for a long second. His name is Stephen, sweetheart, he said. He is your daddy's older brother. I do not know him. Your daddy talked about him sometimes in the desert. Not happily, but sometimes. Did he know about me? Axel hesitated. I believe he did, sweetheart. I believe he did, and I believe he chose not to come for a long time. That is a hard thing to say to an 8-year-old, but I am not going to lie to Cody Boone's daughter. Penny looked at the floor. Then she looked up. I want to talk to him, she said. Not the lawyer, the other one. My daddy's brother. The kitchen got very still. Sweetheart, Mrs. Holden said carefully. I want to talk to him, Penny said. Not for long, just once. With Mr. Rook and Mr. Pierce and you, ma'am, in the room. Because I want to ask him a question. The 3 adults in the kitchen looked at one another. It was not Mrs. Holden who answered. It was Axelcross. All right, ma'am, he said. If you want to talk to him, we will set it up. But not today. Today we need to finish what we are finishing. Today you have an aunt coming. Today we eat pancakes and we make this house safe and we sign papers that mean nobody can move you out of it tonight. Tomorrow we talk about your daddy's brother. Is that fair? Penny was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded. Good girl, Axel said. He stood up slowly from his knee. Penny looked out the kitchen window. Out on the porch, William Cobb in his beautiful wool coat was standing very stiff at the porch rail with his cell phone pressed to his ear. Stephen Whitmore was standing 5 feet away from him with his hands shoved in the pockets of his 2 new green parka, looking at the snow. Deputy Patrick Locke was 20 feet from both of them at the bottom of the porch steps, and Deputy Hank Carver was standing closer than was comfortable to Deputy Locke and not saying a word. Behind all of them on the snowed-in road, 2 more vehicles were coming slowly up the drive in single file. The first one was a small blue Subaru with New Hampshire plates and a roof rack covered in snow. The second one was a white minivan with the seal of the Vermont State Police painted on the door. Aunt Linda was coming up the drive. So was the state police. Penny Boone in her grandmother's gray cardigan, in her grandmother's kitchen, in her grandmother's house, took 2 steps closer to Axel Cross and slipped her hand into his. He closed his hand around hers. "It's all right, ma'am," he said. "We're not going anywhere." Outside, the second vehicle's driver door opened, and a tall woman in a wide-brimmed trooper hat stepped out into the snow, and William Cobb saw her and put his phone down very slowly, and the wool coat seemed for the first time that morning to be a coat that was not actually thick enough for Vermont in February. Penny held Axel Cross's hand and watched through the window as the first stranger she had ever loved by sight, a red-haired woman in a blue parka, climbed out of the Subaru and started running up the path toward the house. Aunt Linda, Penny whispered. She let go of Axel's hand. She ran for the front door. Behind her in the kitchen, 3 adults stood very still. Deacon Pierce slowly closed the green folder on the table. Mrs. Holden put her hand over her mouth for 1 second, then took it down. And Axel Cross watched the small girl in the gray cardigan run out across the porch and into the arms of a woman who had driven all night through a blizzard to find her, and his own eyes did for the first time since he was 19 years old in a country full of dust, fill all the way up. He did not let them spill over. Cody Boone would have wanted him to keep his head. He turned to Deacon Pierce. His voice was the same quiet steel it had been all morning. "Counselor," he said, "what do we need to put William Cobb in a courtroom by Friday?" Deacon Pierce opened the green folder again. "I have a list," he said. "I figured you would." "Mr. Cross." "Deacon, it is going to get worse before it gets better." Axel looked through the window. On the porch, Aunt Linda was on her knees in the snow with Penny Boone wrapped tight in her arms, and Penny was crying for the first time in what must have been days, the long shaking kind that comes when a child finally remembers they are allowed. "It always does," Axel Cross said. The state trooper's name was Sergeant Diane Vaughn, and she had not driven up to the Boone farmhouse by accident. She had driven up because 4 hours earlier in a small office in the basement of the Burlington courthouse, a young intake clerk named Joel had been processing the standard overnight reports and had seen a name come across his desk. The name was William Cobb. The name had been attached to the words emergency mortgage assumption against minor heir. Joel had been processing overnight reports for 2 years. He had seen William Cobb's name 4 times in those 2 years, each time in connection with an estate involving an elderly woman with no surviving spouse and either no children or only 1 distant child. 3 times the houses had been sold inside of 90 days. The 4th was in progress. Joel was a quiet kid. Joel was 19 years old and worked by nights for tuition. But Joel had a grandmother of his own, and Joel had taken a copy of his observations to a Sergeant Vaughn one Tuesday afternoon 6 weeks ago on his own time. Sergeant Vaughn had not forgotten. So that morning when the early shift reported a snowplow-blocked welfare check in a county 60 miles from her usual patrol, and the name of the responding deputy was Patrick Locke, and the name of the legal counsel on the assumption notice was William Cobb, Sergeant Diane Vaughn had told her partner to drive. She walked up the porch steps of the Boone farmhouse without saying a word to William Cobb. She walked past him as if he were not there. She walked past Stephen Whitmore the same way. She stopped beside Deputy Hank Carver, and she said just loud enough for William Cobb to hear it. "Good morning, Deputy. You called this one in." "Yes, ma'am, Sergeant. Anything I need to know before I step inside?" "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Cobb here has just walked into a signature problem and a hospital records problem. The child's interim counsel is inside. The child is inside. The county social worker is inside. The aunt has just arrived." "Good. Any reason I should not introduce myself to Mr. Cobb at this time?" "None I can think of, ma'am." She turned slow and easy and looked at William Cobb. "Mr. Cobb," she said, "my name is Sergeant Diane Vaughn, Vermont State Police Financial Crimes Unit. I would like to ask you to remain on this porch for a few moments while I speak with the child's counsel inside. I would also like to ask you not to leave the property until I return. Do you understand me, sir?" William Cobb did not say anything. He nodded once. Sergeant Vaughn looked at Deputy Patrick Locke. "Deputy, I will need to speak with you also. Please remain on the property." Patrick Locke did not nod. Patrick Locke looked toward the trees. Sergeant Vaughn caught it. "Deputy Carver," she said pleasantly, "would you be so kind as to wait with Deputy Locke until I come back out?" "Yes, ma'am, Sergeant." She walked inside. Penny Boone met her in the entryway with her arms wrapped around the waist of a red-haired woman in a blue parka and Sergeant Vaughn went down on one knee in her boots and her wide-brimmed hat without ceremony, and she said gently, "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Diane. I'm a friend of Mr. Pierce. Is it all right if I borrow him for a few minutes?" Penny looked up at Aunt Linda. Aunt Linda nodded. Penny said, "Yes, ma'am." The grown-ups went into the parlor. Penny stayed in the entryway with Aunt Linda, and Aunt Linda did not say a single sensible thing for 3 minutes. Aunt Linda said only Penny's name over and over, "And you've gotten so big, and I am so sorry I wasn't here. And your hair is your mother's hair, and your hands are your father's hands." And Penny stood with her face pressed into the wet wool of Aunt Linda's parka and let all of it happen. When Aunt Linda finally got herself together, she sat Penny down on the entryway bench, took both of Penny's hands in hers, and said, "Sweetheart, I drove all night. I am going to drive home this week and pack up my apartment, and I am going to come back. I do not know yet whether we will live here or whether we will live in town for a little while. I do not know yet a lot of things. But I want you to know that you and I, we are not separating. Do you hear me, Penelope Joy Boone?" It was the first time anyone had said her whole name out loud in 3 weeks. Penny laid her head on Aunt Linda's shoulder. She did not cry again. She had cried enough for the morning. In the parlor, the door was closed. In the kitchen, Ronald Bishop was washing dishes at the sink without being asked. In the yard, Wade Holden was running the chainsaw on a fallen birch. On the porch, William Cobb stood very still beside Stephen Whitmore, and Stephen Whitmore was looking at the floorboards. Sergeant Diane Vaughn in the parlor listened to Deacon Pierce describe what was in the green folder. She listened to Axel Cross describe what had happened the night before. She listened to Mrs. Holden describe what was in the bank envelope. She took notes in pencil. She did not interrupt. When they were done, she folded her notebook closed. "Gentlemen, ma'am, I would like to make a recommendation. I am not going to arrest Mr. Cobb today. I am also not going to let him leave Vermont. I am going to ask him for his passport before he leaves this porch, and I am going to ask him to surrender it pending an interview at our Burlington office on Monday at 9 in the morning. I will be requesting subpoenas for his client files concerning 4 estates in addition to this one. I am also going to take a statement from Stephen Whitmore today before he leaves this property. He came up here in Mr. Cobb's car. He did not come up here in his own. I find that interesting. He may find it interesting as well by the time we are done with him. Is that satisfactory?" Sergeant Axel said quietly, "May I ask one favor?" "Yes, ma'am." "The child has asked to speak with her father's brother. Not today, tomorrow. With her aunt present, with myself present, and with you present, if you would. There is a question she wants to ask him. I do not know what it is, but she has earned the right to ask it." Sergeant Vaughn looked at Axel for a long moment. "Mr. Cross," she said, "I have been a state trooper for 26 years. I have heard a lot of men explain to me what a child has earned. I do not always agree." "Yes, ma'am. In this case, I agree. I will be there at noon tomorrow." The interview with William Cobb took 11 minutes. He surrendered his passport without protest. He did not look at Penny on his way out. The interview with Stephen Whitmore took 1 hour and 10 minutes, and it took place at the kitchen table with Stephen sitting in the chair where Deacon Pierce had been sitting, and Sergeant Vaughn across from him, and Axel Cross standing beside the wood stove with his arms folded. Stephen Whitmore was not a brave man. Stephen Whitmore broke very quickly. He told Sergeant Vaughn that William Cobb had contacted him 18 months ago after the death of his stepfather regarding an inheritance. Stephen did not know he was due. The inheritance had turned out to be approximately $3,000. Then Cobb had told him there might be a larger one in Vermont if his mother's health continued to decline. Stephen had said sure. Stephen had not asked questions. Stephen had not flown out to see his mother before she died. Stephen had not flown out for her funeral. Stephen, when pressed by Sergeant Vaughn in front of a 31-year veteran trooper and a Hell's Angel in a Vermont kitchen, admitted that he had not seen his mother in 9 years. He admitted that Cody Boone, his younger brother, had written him a letter from Afghanistan 5 months before Cody died, asking Stephen to look out for Penny if anything happened. He admitted he had received the letter. He admitted he had not answered it. He admitted that when his mother had reached out to him a year after Cody's death, asking for help with Penny, he had not answered her either. When asked why Stephen Whitmore looked at the kitchen table for a long time, and then said in a thin voice, "Because I was the older brother. And Cody was the one who got everything." Sergeant Vaughn closed her notebook. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I am not arresting you today. I do not believe at this point that you knew the documents Mr. Cobb prepared were forged. I will need to confirm that with the rest of our investigation. You will be a witness. You will return on Monday for a statement under oath. You will not contact your niece during that time, except through her counsel and her aunt. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Whitmore, one more thing. Yes, ma'am. Your brother. Sergeant Vaughn did not look up from her notebook. Your brother served 3 deployments. Your brother saved the lives of at least 4 men in his last one, and yes, sir, I do read after-action reports when I take a case. Your brother loved your mother, and he loved his daughter, and he did not have a single bad word to say about you in any of his letters home, even when you stopped writing back. I am not telling you that to be cruel, Mr. Whitmore. I am telling you that because you may at some point in the next several hours wish to consider what kind of statement you would like to leave with your niece before you go. Stephen Whitmore put his face in his hands. He did not say anything. At 12:15, when Sergeant Vaughn finally stood to put on her hat, Penny came in from the entryway with Aunt Linda. She looked at Stephen Whitmore. She did not move toward him. She held Aunt Linda's hand. "You're my daddy's brother," she asked. Stephen nodded. "What's your name?" "Your real name." "Stephen." "Did you know him?" Stephen Whitmore swallowed. "I knew him until he was 18, he said. After that, I did not know him very well." Penny was quiet for a long moment. "Did you love him?" A longer silence. "Yes," Stephen Whitmore said, and his voice broke on the word. Penny took the photograph out of the pocket of her grandmother's gray cardigan. It was the one Axel had given her the night before the one from the desert with the row of soldiers. She walked across the kitchen, slowly in her socks. She did not climb onto the chair next to him. She stood beside it. She held the photograph up. "That's him," she said. Stephen looked at the photograph for a long time. "I have not seen this picture before," he said quietly. "Mr. Rook has more of him," Penny said. "He'll show you, if you ask nicely." She put the photograph back in her pocket. She looked at Stephen Whitmore. "I am not going to live with you," she said. "I am going to live with Aunt Linda. But Mr. Rook says I am allowed to ask people questions, and I have one question." "Yes, ma'am." "Daddy wrote you a letter from the desert about me." Stephen Whitmore's face did something Penny would think about for a long time after. "Yes, sweetheart." "What did it say?" The kitchen was so quiet you could hear the new heater clicking in the corner. Stephen Whitmore opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at Sergeant Vaughn, who looked back at him without expression. He looked at Axel Cross, who looked back at him with no expression at all. He looked at Aunt Linda, whose eyes were red. He looked at Penny. It said, Stephen Whitmore said, and his voice was barely above a whisper, that he had a baby girl named Penny, and that she had the biggest eyes he had ever seen, and that if anything ever happened to him, he wanted me to come up to Vermont and find her because he was afraid Mom was getting older and would not be able to do it forever. He said he knew we had not talked in a long time, and he was sorry for his part in that. He said I would be a good uncle if I ever decided to try. He said, please. Penny stood very still. She did not cry. Did you keep it? Stephen Whitmore looked at the table. No, sweetheart, he said. I did not. Penny was quiet for a long time. Then she said, that's okay. I know what it said now. She turned around. She walked back to Aunt Linda. She did not look at Stephen Whitmore again that day. It would be 16 months before she saw him next in a courthouse in Burlington, where he would testify against William Cobb under oath voluntarily, and where at the very end of his testimony, he would turn his face to the front row of the gallery and say into the microphone, I am sorry, Penny. She would nod once from where she sat between Aunt Linda and Axel Cross. She would not say anything back. She would not have to. He would understand. But that came later. The rest of that day, the day the bikers came, the rest of that day went like this. By 2 in the afternoon, William Cobb and Stephen Whitmore were gone in the Cadillac, escorted as far as the county line by Hank Carver. Patrick Locke had been quietly relieved of duty by Sergeant Vaughn an hour before that and was sitting in the back of a state trooper SUV, where he would remain for the rest of the afternoon while a list of his recent traffic stops was very carefully cross-referenced against a list of cash deposits to his personal account. By 3, the inspectors had been through the house. The wood stove flue was condemned. The wiring on the upstairs panel needed replacing. The pipes under the kitchen sink had a small crack from where they had begun to freeze the night before. None of it was beyond fixing. All of it would take a week. By 3:30, the women from the church had cleaned every dish in the kitchen. By 4, the men were starting to ride out one at a time, lifting their hands in goodbye from the saddle. Ronald Bishop was the second to last to leave. He came up to the porch where Penny was wrapped in a blanket beside Aunt Linda, and he said, "Ma'am, I just wanted to say that your pancakes were the best I have ever made." Penny smiled. It was the first real one she had managed in 3 weeks. "Thank you, Mr. Bishop." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and tipped his hat and walked back to his bike. Patch was the last to ride out before sundown. He stopped on his way down the path. He took out a small business card with a phone number handwritten on it, and he handed it to Aunt Linda. "Ma'am," he said, "any time of the day or night, cold fever fall down the stairs, can't sleep, scared anything. That number rings my pocket. It also rings 4 other pockets. One of us is always near a phone." Aunt Linda took the card with both hands. "Thank you," she said. "I do not even know how to thank you." "Your family, ma'am," he said. He nodded to Penny. He walked back to his bike. Axel Cross did not leave at sundown. Axel Cross stayed for supper. Aunt Linda had brought groceries up from New Hampshire in 2 paper bags in the trunk of the Subaru, and the women from the church had brought a casserole, and by 6, the kitchen smelled like a kitchen again, like onions and butter, and something baked. And Penny stood beside Aunt Linda at the stove and stirred a pot of green beans, because Aunt Linda had asked her to, and the silver cross around her neck was warm again, and the new electric heater hummed steady against the wall. Axel sat at the table in his sweater with the leather jacket folded over the back of his chair. He had her grandmother's gray scarf, the one with the small darn at the end, wrapped once around his neck. Penny had put it there herself an hour before on her own without being asked, the way she had handed him the hand warmer at midnight. He had not taken it off since. They ate in the kitchen at the table where William Cobb had sat that morning. Aunt Linda asked the blessing. Penny said amen. Axel said amen, ma'am. Halfway through supper, Penny set down her fork and looked at him. "Mr. Rook." "Yes, ma'am." "The wooden box." The kitchen got quiet again. Aunt Linda looked up. Axel was quiet for a moment. Then he reached down to the chair beside him where his jacket was folded, and he pulled the small wooden box with the brass latch out of his coat pocket. He set it on the table. "I did not open it, Penny. I would not have. It was not mine to open." She looked at it. "Will you open it now with us?" He looked at Aunt Linda. Aunt Linda nodded. Axel undid the brass latch with his thick fingers. Inside the box was a square of folded paper, yellowed at the edges, with one fold deeper than the others, the way a piece of paper bends when it has lived a long time in a uniform pocket. He took it out. He opened it. He read it once silently, his eyes moving slowly down the page, and then he looked up at Penny. "Sweetheart," he said, "it's for you." He turned the paper around and laid it flat on the table in front of her. Penny could read most of the words. She could not read all of them. But Aunt Linda's voice was steady and low beside her, and Aunt Linda read it out loud, line by line, while Penny ran her finger along under the words. "Penny girl," the letter began. "They told me yesterday I might not make it home this round. They might be wrong. They have been wrong before. But if they are right, I want you to know some things. 1. You were the best thing I ever made. You came out of your mother looking surprised at the lights, and you have been making me proud every day since, even on the days I have not been there to see it. I see it anyway, ma'am. You remember that. 2, there are 2 kinds of family in this world, Penny girl. There is the kind you are born to, which is the kind you got with Mama and Grandma Helen and me. And there is the kind that finds you. Sometimes the second kind comes out of a storm. Sometimes they come out of a desert. Sometimes they wear bad jackets and ride loud bikes. And they do not look at first like anyone your grandmother would have invited over. But you watch their hands, Penny girl. You watch their hands. Good hands take their boots off in a house. Good hands ask before they touch. Good hands stand between you and the wind. Trust hands, ma'am. Faces lie, hands do not. 3, if a man named Axel ever finds you, you tell him I said hello. You tell him I said he kept his promise. You tell him he does not owe me a single thing more. I love you, ma'am. Daddy." Aunt Linda's voice was wet by the last line. Penny did not look up. She put her hand on the paper flat. She did not read it again. She did not have to. Axel Cross sat across from her in her grandmother's gray scarf with his weathered hands flat on the table, and he was not crying, but his eyes were wet, and he was breathing through his nose because his throat had closed. After a long time, Penny said, "Mr. Rook." "Yes, ma'am." "Daddy says hello." Axel Cross closed his eyes. "Tell him I say hello back, sweetheart," he said. "And he says you kept your promise." "I'm working on it, ma'am." "And he says you don't owe him anything anymore." Axel Cross opened his eyes. "With respect to your daddy, ma'am," he said, "that is a thing only I get to decide." Penny nodded slow. She folded the letter very carefully along its old folds and put it back in the wooden box. She closed the brass latch. She slid the box across the table to Aunt Linda. "For the safe box," she said, like Grandma kept things. Aunt Linda took the box with both hands. Outside, the snow had stopped. The wind had stopped. The road had been plowed all the way down to the highway by the county and a couple of the bikers' borrowed trucks, and the stars were coming out one by one in a sky so clear it was almost cruel after the storm. Penny walked Axel Cross to the door. He put on his jacket. He put on his boots. He still wore her grandmother's gray scarf, which he had not taken off all day. He went down on one knee one more time in the entryway. "Penny, Mr. Rook, I'm not going far, sweetheart. The chapter house is in Burlington. That's an hour. I will be back next Saturday with the boys, and we will help you and your aunt move whatever she needs to move from New Hampshire. I will be back the Saturday after that and the one after that. I am going to be around, ma'am. You will be tired of me before you are not tired of me. Is that all right?" Penny nodded. "Good," he said. He started to stand. Penny put both her hands on his face. Her palms were small and cold and serious. She held his face the way her grandmother had held her face the day before the ambulance came. "Daddy says thank you," she said. Axel Cross closed his eyes. He did not cry. He put his big rough hand over her small cold hand on his cheek and pressed it there for one long breath. "Tell him you're welcome, ma'am," he said. He stood up. He opened the door to a clear winter night. He walked down the porch steps to his bike. Penny stood in the open doorway with Aunt Linda's hand on her shoulder, and she watched him swing his leg over the saddle and start the engine and lift his chin to the men who were following him out, and the line of headlights came on one by one down the snowy drive like a slow string of stars, and the rumble of the engines rolled down the county road and across the fields and out to the highway, and after a little while it faded into a sound no louder than the wind moving through the bare apple trees in the side yard, and then it was gone. Penny watched the empty road for a long time. Then she turned and went inside to her aunt. It was spring when she saw him again. The apple trees by the side yard had bloomed. The road had cleared so long ago she could barely remember the snow. Aunt Linda had moved her books from New Hampshire and gotten a job at the elementary school in town, and she and Penny lived in the farmhouse, which had a new wood stove and new wiring and a new sign by the front door that Wade had carved on a clean piece of pine. The sign said, "Boone House. No child stands alone." Penny was helping Aunt Linda hang sheets on the line in the side yard, and she heard the engines before she saw them. She had learned to hear them. The motorcycles came up the county road and turned in at the drive, and they parked in the same place they had parked in the snow 3 rows now, and Penny dropped a wooden clothespin in the grass and ran across the yard barefoot in her summer dress. He had ridden in first the way he always did. He was already off the bike. He had her grandmother's gray scarf in his hand. He had taken it off for the warm weather. He was bringing it back to her. He had carried it through the spring thaw, through Easter, through every county between Burlington and home, and he had kept it folded in his saddlebag the entire time because it had been hers and she had given it to him, and he was giving it back now because the cold was gone. She ran straight to him. He went down on one knee in the dirt in the front yard of the Boone farmhouse, and she put her small arms around his neck, and he held her with both of his huge weathered ones, and she said into the collar of his leather jacket, "Mr. Rook." "Yes, ma'am." "You came back." "Yes, ma'am." "For good." He pulled back just enough to see her face. His eyes were the same eyes they had been on the porch that midnight in February, brown and tired and lined. "Sweetheart," Axel Cross said, "for as long as you want me to." Penny took her grandmother's scarf out of his hand and put it back around his neck herself with both hands like she had the first time. "For good then," she said. And in the side yard, the apple blossoms shook a small white storm down onto the grass, and Aunt Linda came across the lawn in her gardening apron with her hand shielding her eyes against the spring sun, and behind Axel, the rest of the men were climbing off their bikes one by one in the long shadows of the late afternoon, taking their helmets off, knocking the dust off their jeans, and walking up toward the porch of a small farmhouse where no child stood alone, because the door had been opened once in a storm, and after that the world had not been able to close it again.